MRT family. Thank you for tuning in and welcome back to another episode of Motherhood Real Talk. Today, we'll be discussing motherhood and postpartum depression. And joining me for this discussion is Melissa Keene. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Michelle.
And so Melissa is a licensed associate professional counselor with a certification in perinatal mental health. And she's provided individual and group counseling to women throughout Atlanta, Georgia, where I currently reside also. And as an expert in maternal mental health, Melissa has trained clinicians, birth workers, other healthcare providers on the topic of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And so Melissa comes to us with a wealth of knowledge on perinatal mental health. And I'm so thrilled to have her with us today because I know that we're going to get a lot of information to arm ourselves to support women in our lives that may be experiencing some form of anxiety during their pregnancy or after their pregnancy. And so, Melissa, I have 3 children. And of course, and here comes the youngest one right now. But my youngest is turning 3 in about a month. And the more that I learn about postpartum depression and mood disorders during pregnancy and after pregnancy, it has me thinking that at some point or another, I may have gone through some of this, but haven't really realized it or even owned up to it because there's a lot of stigma that's associated with, postpartum depression and anxiety because your focus is always around, I want to be a good mom. I want to be a great mom. And so I can't live in the space of I'm going through this baby blues kind of moment. And so postpartum depression can sometimes take many forms and can remain undiagnosed for long periods of time. And so with that, as I was doing my research for this particular episode, there were some staggering statistics that I came across, and so I'm going to ask you to add some reality to this. But based on what I found, there are approximately 70 to 80% of women who will experience at least the minimum of baby blues at some point, right? And that postpartum depression affects new mothers around 10 to about 20%. So if we were to put that into sort of numbers that we can kind of digest, it's about 1 to 7 women may be experiencing PPD at some point in the year. So there's about 4,000, I think, live births a year, and that constitutes about 600,000 diagnoses. And so help us to kind of understand some of the risk factors for postpartum depression, or help us to unpack the statistic a little bit.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for that great introduction, Michelle. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so passionate about this topic, and I will, not only talk as a clinician who works in this field as a professional, but also as a mom myself. I'm a mom of 2 elementary school children. And like you had mentioned, and I think a lot of women can also relate to, it's not until we go through our own experiences that we really realize what's going on. I'm very transparent, and I like to try and share a little bit of my story when I can. This is a second career for me. I used to be in marketing and advertising, and a big reason why I got into this work, kind of second stage of life, was because when I went through my own transition to parenthood, I did really struggle, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have a way to label it. I didn't know where to get support. I didn't even know that it was a thing to get support for. I thought that was just kind of normal, and I guess I was just doing it wrong. So I share that because I can definitely relate to what you had said. In terms of the statistics, you're right, it is staggering, and I hate to say they're really underreported. You had referenced, up to 20% or 1 in 7 women, that's diagnosed of a mood or anxiety disorder during pregnancy or postpartum. So when I say diagnosed, that's significant because that means that someone actually sought treatment or was given some kind of assessment and was given that diagnosis, we know that these numbers are really underreported. How many women are afraid to speak up, or, you know, perhaps their doctors or providers that they're working for don't know the right questions to ask. It's something that a lot of women are hiding out of that shame that you referenced. I also want to talk to your statistic about baby blues, because I think that's actually a really great place to start. I think we all know about that term baby blues, right? And I think we use it a lot sometimes, maybe in a way that's not entirely accurate. Statistically speaking, yes, it is up to 80% of women will experience baby blues. And that's that, you know, transition, maybe the first 10 to so days postpartum, where your hormones are crashing, you are probably experiencing some sleep deprivation, your moods are kind of going on that roller coaster. You might be happy one minute and crying another. So some of that weepiness, a little bit overwhelmed. But the thing with baby blues is that it's going to dissipate on its own without real intervention, maybe with a little bit of support from your family or your friends, that over time, naturally within that about 2-week window, you're going to start to feel more like yourself again. When we look at the difference between like baby blues or something more significant like postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, for example, we want to look at timing. First of all, you know, am I more than 2 to 3 weeks postpartum and I'm still feeling that way? I'm not returning back. I'm still riding that emotional roller coaster. Maybe it's getting worse. Then we're not talking about baby blues anymore. And I think sometimes we still refer to it as that. So I think that that's kind of in terms of helping someone identify the signs of, you know, postpartum depression or, you know, mood disorder during this time, is that timing is an important factor. The second is those symptoms, you know, whereas in baby blues, you might have some weepiness, but you're still going to have moments of kind of feeling like yourself, and it's going to kind of go in and out. Someone experiencing more depression, it's going to look like what you think depression might look like during other times. You know, real loss of interest, maybe difficulty bonding with your baby, you know, really kind of experiencing those highs and lows, changes in appetite, changes in sleep, sleeping too much or sleeping too little. And it's really going to start to become more debilitating for, you know, for this mom. You know, she might be having a hard time taking care of herself, doing some basic functioning. And like I said before, you know, we start to see that. If it's okay, one other symptom that I wanted to talk about that I think a lot of us don't necessarily associate with this is rage and anger. Sometimes for some of us, that anxiety or depression can present like real irritability and rage. And that's, I think, one of those symptoms that a lot of women feel a lot of shame about, and they think something must be wrong with me. How can I be so angry at this little thing I love so much? But really, we're just dealing with these intense emotions and we're not really sure how to kind of ground and transition.
And so, and in thinking about it, because one of the things that I latched onto that you just shared around sort of like there's a particular time frame that we can start to identify some of these things. And so is there a period after giving birth where there's like a cutoff to say, this is now no longer postpartum depression, it's something else that we need to be considering here? Because I think that sometimes also, you know, becomes a part of it where it's like, okay, I've given birth to the baby. And so this is usually the time period where this happens. And now I'm beyond that. So is there sort of like a cutoff to then say this is no longer what it is?
Well, like I said before, anything over that like 10 to 14 day period, if you meet the, you know, clinical diagnosis of, really at any time, if a woman is going to meet the clinical diagnosis of depression or anxiety, for example, it really doesn't matter when that starts. I think the time frame comes into play when you have a woman who comes in, I don't know, let's say 4 months postpartum and says, you know, I think this is baby blues. We can automatically already say, well, it's more than baby blues just because you've gotten through that first, you know, 10 to 14 day window. You know, another thing to mention is we've talked a lot about postpartum, so after we've given birth, but statistically speaking, we are actually talking about pregnancy as well as postpartum. And sort of by definition, we're looking at any time from conception of the pregnancy through the first 12 months after you've had the baby. That's sort of what we professionals refer to as the perinatal time frame. But, clinically, we know that because of the stigma, because of the normal transitions that happen when you become a parent, a lot of women are not seeking treatment till well past, that kind of initial first couple of months. It's not uncommon for me to have a woman come in, a year or 2 years postpartum and say, like, I'm still not feeling like myself. I'm having the symptoms. But the question I always ask is, when did they start?
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for putting a stamp on that, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I think oftentimes after you have the baby, you can probably say, this is how I'm feeling. But then a lot of women do not seek help. And so it's like 2 years postpartum, you're like, well, I'm still feeling this way. But really, you didn't seek the help that you needed prior to. So you hadn't gone through that process. And so, you might have a mom that's, her babies too. And it's just like, well, am I still suffering from, postpartum depression, and what support should I then be seeking? So thank you for stamping that for me. That was a big question for me, because like I said, part of this is personal, but then I'm not quite sure, but I know it's a conversation a lot of women, have been having, and I see it come up all the time. I'm experiencing it now, in my own family, with other women that are actually going through the childbirth process and, preparing themselves for, caring for their baby. So it's one that really hits home, but sometimes I reflect on my own experience and try to understand it and arm myself with the right information so that I can seek help if ever, I feel the need to then go that route also, even if it's 2 years after the fact. And so is there a particular profile of women that experience postpartum depression? And even with that, one of the things that we talked about prior to this was, like, given the pandemic right now, does that then heighten, the experience for women and possibly experiencing postpartum depression?
Unfortunately, yeah, it absolutely does. And I think you're right. This is a relevant part of what's going on in our world right now. In terms of a profile, I'm glad you asked that, because, really, first off, any woman can experience postpartum depression. In fact, if you didn't know, men can also experience postpartum depression, as can non-birthing parents, adoptive parents. If you have partners who are, having a child together, it's not just the birthing parent, which speaks to a couple of different things. But, I'll speak sort of to women, because that's really the, majority of the, presentations that we're seeing. But in general, anyone can experience postpartum depression. It is largely about, we call it the biopsychosocial phase. We've got the biological changes, we've got the social and emotional changes, and the psychological changes that go into becoming a parent. Mm-hmm. So it can really affect anyone. It does not discriminate in that sense. That being said, we know that there are risk factors that do make you more likely to experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. And just to clarify that term, because I know I've used it interchangeably a lot, I recognize that postpartum depression is sort of the hallmark phrase, if you will, and I'm so glad that we are talking about it. But the reality is that we're not just talking about depression. We are talking about a whole spectrum of, mental health disorders or challenges that can happen during both pregnancy as well as postpartum. So just wanted to clarify that point. But, probably the biggest risk factor that we want to look at is a personal or a family history of mental health challenges in the past. What we see a lot is a woman who maybe had difficulties during transitions in adolescence, or, going to college for the first time, or going through a difficult breakup or something like that. Other big transitions when we see, maybe they had a depressive episode when they were in college. They've been fine since then, but now they're kind of seeing that again. That is going to increase your risk significantly for having challenges during this phase, as well as, if your family has a history of, anxiety or depression. One thing that I always suggest to clients, if you happen to be in pregnancy and you're trying to assess your risk, This is a great way if you have a relationship and your parents are still, living, ask them about their birth story and their birth experience. It's a great way to kind of start to create that history. A lot of clients will say, I went and talked to my mom about her birth experience, and she told me that she had really significant postpartum depression when she had me, and I had no idea. We've never talked about it before. So, first off, kind of knowing your personal as well as family history, with mental health challenges can definitely put you more at risk. We also unfortunately know that certain populations do have a higher prevalence, such as, African American and Hispanic women have a disproportionate higher number of cases of perinatal mental health challenges. That's really attributed to a variety of factors that largely have to do with, social support, lack of resources, access to care, history of trauma and or prior mental health challenges. So, we know that you talked about the 1 in 7, we know that those numbers are much higher for women of color. And so we definitely want to take care and trying to do whatever we can to kind of mitigate some of those supports that can help really, support her through this experience.
So one of the things also, and I'm glad because, again, the show, honestly, it's supposed to start a conversation. It's really supposed to provide information, things that we didn't necessarily also consider. And I did see that fact around, fathers also being affected by postpartum depression. And to be quite frank, it's something that women are largely affected by, but then that's also something to kind of keep at the back of your mind, even that you're going to be parenting together, to be able to identify those things as well. So I wanted to share that also, because I invite men to come in and watch, because there's just so much information that you can also learn. My question was you kind of answered it partially, which was, what are ways women can be proactive in preventing this? And one of the things I heard you say was really know your family history. And so that's one way to start to gather some information for yourself, so you can start doing the preparation work to ensure that, you are not necessarily prone to or would have to experience it if you can do some proactive work. So are there other things women should be considering during this critical period to help themselves?
Absolutely. I also wanted to clarify, 2 other risk factors that I think can speak to, I think it's about knowing the risk factors and then looking at ways that we can sort of get ahead of that and be proactive, to your point. So, in addition to that history, knowing your history and sort of having protocols in place based on that, we also, in light of the pandemic, right, we want to look at other environmental factors that might be going on in your life. If you are in the middle of any kind of major transition, if you have recently lost a loved one, so you're dealing with grief also, if you've started a new job, lost a new job, maybe you're in the middle of a move, there's been some other significant life event going on, that you are going to be more likely and more prone to experiencing some of these challenges. Think about the pandemic, okay? We are universally, at some degree, all experiencing disruption in our lives, and that ranges from, financial instability, our health and safety concerns. We're trying to parent and work, and all of these roles that we're trying to play collectively. Not to mention, one of the major things that unfortunately is happening is we are adding on isolation to our new moms. Pregnant new moms. We talk about ways that we can be proactive and support one of the most important things that we can do is surround ourselves with a really good support team. I'm sure you're familiar with that term. It takes a village.
Yes.
It's so true. And it's more true now than I think ever before, especially in our society. Listen, we can live anywhere we want now. Families are spanning. We don't necessarily have our village where we live. When we are becoming parents or adding a second, third, or fourth child to our family. So we have to really build out that community and build that village in ways we can. Unfortunately, right now, that's more challenging.
Yeah.
So isolation and that sort of withdrawal, we unfortunately is a huge risk factor and consideration for postpartum depression or anxiety. So we have to really be creative in making sure that we find those supports elsewhere. So talking about that a little bit more, support can come in a whole host of different ways. Support can look like your friends and family, right?
Yeah.
Making you good meals, checking in on you. If they can't physically come to your house, making sure that they're checking in and not only asking how you're doing, you know, kind of enveloping the baby and the whole house. Like, no, how are you doing? And not accepting an answer if you don't think that, you know, the mom's really okay. Letting her know that you're thinking about her. But I'm kind of also jumping in about how we can support our friends, but
Yeah.
thinking about being proactive, right? So if I'm a woman who's pregnant or I've just had a baby and I want to really do everything I can to make this transition as easy as possible on myself, get ahead of some of those, you know, mental health challenges, I'm going to shore up all those supports. If I have worked with a therapist in the past, or I have a mental health provider that I feel comfortable with, you know, go ahead and line up an intake session ahead of time and put together a postpartum care plan. That's something that I do with a lot of my clients when I have the ability to get ahead of it. Line up all of those areas of support. Know what you need. Are you the kind of person that wants folks to come in and like give you a hug if they're having a hard time, or do you just want someone to sit with you and let you cry?
Yes.
Bring you a hot meal. Who are you going to call when you're feeling like things are spiraling out of control and you just need to talk it out? You know, knowing ahead of time before you're in the thick of it, what that's going to look like. So those are just a couple of suggestions. Know where the support groups are in your community, both in person if you're able to do that, or especially now, there's tons of online support groups that are being offered nationwide. Most of them are free. Most of them are drop-in. And I'll be happy to share some of those resources at the end as well. But I think trying to do it on your own is really going to put you at a disadvantage. So, you know, wherever possible, surround yourself with people that you care and trust that are going to, you know, keep pushing you forward.
Yeah. And thank you so much for underscoring the thing that we've been pushing a whole lot here at MRT, particularly for mothers. I think oftentimes we feel the need to take care of everyone else but ourselves. And so the one sort of like golden line that you said there was just ask for what you need. Arm yourself with a village of people that you know that can certainly support you, and tell them how, you know, or what that support looks like for you. And so I thought that was important to share because support looks very different for different people. And, you know, even for me looking in and figuring out how do I support others in my village or how I want to be supported, I have to communicate that. So I think that's certainly super important. And I will take you up on that at the very end. Please share those resources with us because I think that, you know, we've kind of opened up again the conversation that needs to be happening, particularly, you know, during this time when we know folks are distant and isolated and really can't really have their village around them. But we can be creative in the ways in which we can ensure that that can certainly happen for women during a super critical time, you know, when you really do need your village. One of the things that I wanted to ask, and you started to touch on this a little bit, was how we can actually support and be proactive in that support. And so I want us to be able to kind of like lay it out and stamp it, because oftentimes when we get a lot of information, like, ooh, this is so juicy, this is so good, but I really want folks to be clear about how they can actually support. And so if we can go like kind of like line by line, here are things that we can actually do as action steps to support someone that you may suspect or is going through postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, so if you have a loved one or someone that you care about and you suspect that they might be having a hard time, you know, it's a delicate dance, right? Because when we are feeling our most vulnerable, we're really going to protect that.
Yep.
Right? We all have those girlfriends when you say like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm okay. And letting them know that you can handle it,
Yeah.
that okay is not going to be a good enough answer.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it takes a little bit to build that trust, to let them know, I see you, I hear you, and I'm not going to take that, you know. And I think trusting your intuition, if you, you know, are with a girlfriend and you suspect that she's having a hard time, you know, and she's not quite comfortable talking about that, you know, just sitting with her or letting her know, this is one tangible thing that I can say. We all have the like, well, let me know if you need anything, I'm over here. And it's kind of that generalized, you know, offer of support, which is good.
Yeah.
But better would be offering real, tangible support. Hey, how about I make you a meal and drop it off tomorrow? I'm sure the last thing you want to do is worry about what your family's going to eat. Or if they have an older child, hey, you know what? I was thinking about, well, maybe not now in the pandemic, but right, if, you know, generally speaking, I was thinking about coming over. I can take your older daughter, son, whatever, to the park for an hour so you can take a nap. Or I'll come over, I'll clean your bathroom, I'll go to the run for the grocery store, and really just giving very specific and concrete ways that you can help take some of that off the plate. Not, you asked before about asking for what you need, because a lot of moms are not able to do that. We may, a lot of times what happens is that we are so focused on the baby, right? Like, let me come and hold the baby and you can take a shower, or you can take a nap. Well, that might not be what she wants. Maybe she's really trying to bond with that baby, and what she really just needs is for you to take care of all the other stuff that's going on behind the scenes so that she can just sit quietly and focus on, you know, bonding with that baby. But you're only going to know if you ask. And so it's sort of a combination of asking, and if she can't answer that, having like a handful of specific things you can offer. Well, I can do this, or I can do this. You know, which one would be more helpful for you right now?
That is so, so good. You know, I think you giving sort of like that concrete advice has given me also ideas for how I can actually support. And it sounds so real. Because again, from my experience, the hardest thing to do is always to ask for help, because you just really want to seem like I got it. I've got it covered, you know, but it's a-okay to support and still being there, even if it seems as if, you know, the help is not necessarily being accepted in the moment. But I think it's, like you said, you know, just building that level of trust to say, listen, I got it. You know, I totally understand what it is and I want to be there for you. So
the other thing that I would offer, which is not necessarily help, but more of just that emotional support, which is validating. Allowing her to feel seen and heard. If she needs to sit there and cry, we so want to jump in and fix it.
Yeah.
And in many cases, it's about, as the support person, checking in with yourself. Can I just show up for this mom or this, you know, parent, and let them talk it out? Yeah. Validate. I hear you saying how hard this is. This is so hard. You're doing such a great job. Not trying to minimize it, you know, not trying to even fix it, just validating and, you know, empathizing that, you know, yeah, you're doing a great job. I'm here for you. We're going to get through this, but, you know, allowing her to just experience what she's experiencing. We hear a lot from new moms that they feel like they're invisible sometimes.
Yeah.
And so being able to sit with that information, and if you feel like she's really struggling and needs a higher level of care, that's a really sensitive subject to say to a friend. Like, I think you should probably talk to a professional. I think there's a delicate way to say that, but letting her know that, you know, it seems like she's, you know, having a hard time, maybe, you know, could really benefit from having somebody to talk to. This is another way you can offer support. Hey, can I help you do some research?
Yeah.
I know that like when I was a mom, it was really great to have somebody to talk to. Would it be okay if I got you a couple phone numbers? Or, I thought that going to a new moms group really helped me just feel like I wasn't alone. Would it be helpful if I put together a list of a couple in your area? That's another great way you can be supportive.
Awesome. And again, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think oftentimes even the conversation and to strike up the conversation can be really hard to do. And so you've given us some tangible ways that we can really provide support outside of doing the doing, but actually, saying if we need to, here are other ways in which we can actually support. So I really appreciate those gems. One of the things that I also wanted to address is the impact of postpartum depression when left untreated for the moms and for children that are involved. And as I've learned, tragically, 10% of postpartum psychosis cases may result in suicide or infanticides. And so can you share a little bit more about the impact on mother and baby if this is left untreated?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are very significant and multi-level outcomes when these postpartum challenges are not addressed, because the reality is they are very treatable. They're not likely going to go away on their own, but they will with the right support. And it's about finding that right support and taking that first step. But absolutely, we talk about the maternal outcomes on mom herself. Suicide and maternal mortality are really high. And so we want to be careful and understand that it's not just about, muscling through it. There are significant risks to the mom herself. You talked about the child, short term, if mom is really going through a significant depressive episode and is not taking care of herself, she's most likely also not taking care of the baby. It impacts that kind of early attachment that can be so important. Now, that's not to say it has to happen right then and that we can't work through that and kind of get there later on, but the reality is that does impact that, and that can have long-term consequences, for that child, both socially and emotionally and developmentally down the line. We do know that it can affect them long-term.
And
So these are real and they're multifaceted. It is something that is a public health impact.
And so in thinking about, because a lot of information I think was shared here today, and it's going to take a lot for folks to be able to process it, particularly for a woman who's experiencing this or likely has someone close that's experiencing this. And so if we were to kind of sum up all the things that we talked about today, Melissa, what would be one or two salient takeaways that you would like to share with folks to say, here, if there's nothing else that you take away from today, here's one or two things to be thinking about if you know someone or may be experiencing postpartum depression?
Gosh, yeah, it's hard to distill it, but I think the first point would be that you're not alone. We talk about shame and, how much that stigma can get in the way of someone wanting to speak up and get help. And I think just to let her know, both for myself and if you are in a position to support someone, that postpartum depression is the number one complication in childbirth. Much more than gestational diabetes, much more than any other thing that we might be openly talking about and screening for. So, we talk about that conservative number of 1 in 7, which I know is really low. It's much more than that. But being able to break that stigma, talk about it, ask those questions. So just to say, no, you're not alone. It's very common. Common doesn't mean normal, like you don't have to deal with it or do anything about it, but it's very common. And we want you to know that, you can talk about it and that support is available. The second point, which sort of goes along with that, is that it's very treatable. With help, you will get better. That's part of why I love working in this population, is because we can, with the proper tools and with the proper intervention, we can really make a difference and you can feel better. I guess the takeaway there is find a trusted person If you are feeling not like yourself, if you're pregnant or postpartum, I don't care if you're 1 year, 5 years postpartum, if you've never quite felt like yourself again and your life is significantly, challenged because of the way you're feeling, find someone you trust, open up, let them know that. If you don't get the response that you're wanting, find someone else until you do. Develop a plan with them that makes sense for your needs and your situation. And for anyone who's listening, if you're unsure where to get that support, if it's okay, Michelle, I just wanted to offer one. So in addition to my clinical work, I'm also on the board of directors for the Georgia chapter for Postpartum Support International. Postpartum Support International, PSI, is the largest international organization that supports the sort of well-being of moms and the emotional health of women during childbearing years. But they have several offerings that are for free, where moms can get connected with professionals, they can find information, they can get connected to a support group, they can talk to someone through a helpline, which is staffed by trained volunteers. So that is something that's available to anyone. The website is postpartum.net. I'll make sure, Michelle, you have all this information if you want to put it somewhere, but there's also a 1-800 number that you can call. And no matter where you are located, you can be connected with resources in your community.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was actually the next step that I wanted to kind of get to, which is where do we find you? Because lots of good stuff. And also, where we can find information, to share with our viewers, just in case they're wanting resources to support themselves or others. And what you shared, absolutely, I would love for you to share that information with me. I'll definitely put it on our page, because I do think that with the staggering statistics, up until having to do this episode, I didn't know how prevalent this was, despite the conversation. And so I'm glad we're having a conversation. I'm even more thrilled that we had an opportunity to talk and hear all the things that you shared. And, now knowing where we can find these resources, because I am certain that this is going to reach someone that's going to need it in that moment. And so you've done us a great service here today, being with us. And I hope that we can keep this conversation going. Typically what ends up happening is we get a lot of questions that come in after one of our episodes, and then we end up doing a live. So my hope is that we can connect again to continue, share this to continue to share this information, because I honestly learned a lot sitting here with you in the 30 to 45 minutes that we've been here. But I know it's going to touch someone's life, and this is what this platform is all about. So I truly appreciate you being with us today, Melissa, and I send so much gratitude for the information that you shared.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that you are bringing this important topic to your community, and I'm happy to answer any questions that come up down the line.
All right. So MRT folks, you heard it here. Melissa would likely be on our live to answer questions that you may have. So tune in for that information on our Motherhood Real Talk page. And Melissa, until we talk again, wishing you all the best during these challenging times. And thank you again so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All righty. Bye for now.